Welcome. As you get comfortable and take your virtual seat, let me introduce myself. I'm Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, and I, on behalf of the Friends and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisor, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind with Rabbi Steve Leder on his new book, For When I Am Gone. Just a few housekeeping notes. Take off your watch, get settled, get comfortable, because what you're about to hear will actually shift the way you think about who you are and what legacy you want to leave. The program will last about an hour and with 15 minutes reserved for your questions, so be prepared to type them into the Q&A, and towards the end I will get to them, but feel free to type them along the way. Also know that today's program is being taped and will be available for viewing on YouTube on our channel, which you can find on the website www.friendsofthesemilinstitute.org. Again, www.friendsofthesemilinstitute.org. Know that there you'll also find a library of videos of past Open Mind programs that will enlighten you. It will also share information about the Friends Scholar Program and our Open Mind Festival. So we hope that you'll go there and you will check out everything on our website. As you know, the Open Mind lecture film series, our film lecture and film series brings together thought leaders in science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. As with any public radio or TV or film, Open Mind programming is brought to you an important public service, and we hope that you will consider making a donation. The information is on our website, and every dollar counts in order so that we can continue to provide this invaluable programming. With no further ado, I want to introduce our first two guests today. First, Rabbi Steve Leder, the senior rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. After graduating from Northwestern University, go Wildcats, cum laude, he went off to Oxford. Since then, he received his master's degree in Hebrew letters in 1986 and rabbinical ordination in 1987 from Hebrew Union College. He is the author of 5 books: The Extraordinary Nature of Ordinary Things, More Money Than God, Living a Rich Life Without Losing Your Soul, and bestsellers, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, and The Beauty of What Remains. It is my pleasure to welcome Stephen to our Open Mind. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Sherre. Thank you so much.
Our special co-guest today is Dr. David Rubin, director of the multi-campus program in geriatrics medicine and gerontology, and chief of the division of geriatrics at UCLA Health. Dr. Rubin, his resume is so long, but I will just give you some of the highlights. He sustains professional interest in clinical care, education, research, and administrative aspects of geriatrics, while at the same time maintaining a clinical primary care practice of frail older persons and attending on inpatient and geriatric psychiatry at UCLA. His bibliography includes more than 220, you heard me correctly, 220 peer-reviewed publications in medical journals, 39 books, and numerous chapters. He is the lead author of the widely distributed book, Geriatrics at Your Fingertips. He's the past president of the American Geriatric Society, the Association of Directors of Geriatric Academic Programs. That's a mouthful, David. He served for 11 years on the Geriatrics Test Writing Committee for the American Board of Internal Medicine, and for 8 years on the ABIM's Board of Directors, including as chair from 2010 to 2011. And with that, let me welcome Dr. David Rubin. Hi, David. So nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us. So I want to dive right in because Stephen, Rabbi Leder, you had me at the first page when you used Jonathan Safran Foer's famous quote, and I read, "No father knows when the book has closed on the last bedtime story he will ever read." 2 pages in, that quote takes on incredible significance. So let's just begin on telling us the background of how this book began.
The book began for two different, but I think equally important reasons. The first is that, and my previous book was both a memoir and a field guide, and the memoir part was my relationship with my father, including the last 10 years of his life when he was journeying through Alzheimer's. So one of the great motivations behind this book is that I didn't know, it's still hard to talk about, I didn't know that my last conversation with my dad was my last conversation with my dad. One visit to spend time with him in his nursing home in Minneapolis, he could talk and we could have a conversation, limited, but nevertheless, I love you too. And then the next visit, he couldn't, and he really never spoke again for the rest of his life. And I realized that we never really know. We never really know when something has ended. Like Jonathan Safran Foer's quote, no father knows when it's the last bedtime story he's ever going to snuggle in bed with his child and read. I remember when my daughter Hannah was, I don't know, somewhere around 3 years old, and that was the last bath I could ever give her. She kicked me out of the bathroom. And we just don't know sometimes when these things are ending. And I was asked last week to summarize the book in 2 words, and I said, don't wait. Don't wait to express these things. The other reason that I wrote the book is that in the previous book, The Beauty of What Remains, I spent maybe 2 paragraphs on the idea of an ethical will, of leaving a non-material will, a real, a legacy that is an expression of our values, ideals. 60, 100 words out of 55,000. And that's what most non-Jewish journalists and podcast hosts and TV hosts wanted to talk about. They wanted to tell us more about this ethical will. And I realized that most people had never heard of it and therefore never done it. And that also was a stimulus for the,
So before we go a step further, I think everybody attaches or connects with this idea that we don't know the last moment. And you actually give us the remedy of how to make the last moment be extended into long after their death. So tell us what an ethical will is and why you wrote an entire book about it.
It is helpful to start with what it is not.
Great.
It is not a last will and testament. It is not a document that talks about who gets what, when, and how much of it.
And nobody thinks of not writing a last will and testament.
If we asked however many hundreds of people are watching right now, raise your hand if you have an estate plan and you have given considerable thought, time, and energy and spent a fair amount of money on figuring out who gets your stuff when you're gone. Everyone does it.
Right? Wouldn't think of not doing it.
Correct. And the irony of that, or the sad irony of that is the last word from you to your loved ones when you're gone for most people. It is a dry, boilerplate, legalese document about stuff, almost always drafted by someone who barely knows you. And that's your final word? That's it? And it's so sad because one of the saddest memories of the aftermath of my father's death was going downstairs into the basement of my parents' home and seeing all of his stuff in a heap on the floor in the basement. Nobody wanted it. Goodwill didn't want it. And we make this mistake. I won't call it a sin. I'll call it a mistake. We make this mistake in believing that somehow the material will express the emotional and the spiritual. And I often say, Sherre, that's like handing your loved ones a picture of food. It's not going to nourish them. It's not going to sustain them. It's not going to comfort them. What they need, what I miss, what I want, what we all want, is the voice, the guidance, the words, the blessing, the life lessons based on flaws and mistakes and successes, advice. That's what we want. And you know this.
We want their human.
Yes.
Right? We want their soul.
Right. And you know this as well as anyone on this webinar. In biblical Hebrew, the word for word and the word for thing is the same word, davar. You cannot differentiate between the two in biblical Hebrew, which in my view means, from a psycholinguistic standpoint, words are real, they are concrete, they are tangible, they build, they destroy, they create, they ruin. Words are the most real inheritance we can bequeath to our loved ones when we're gone. And so an ethical will, it goes back to the 11th century in Italy and France. It originally began as a letter from a father to a son to offer the son some guidance and instruction after the father had died. It then evolved, of course, into fathers to sons and daughters, mothers to sons and daughters, siblings, spouses, partners, friends. It evolved, it blossomed. But essentially, it's a bequest. And most people just don't know how to get started. So the book asks 12, what I call 12 essential questions to tell a life story. To tell us the story of your life, not the facts of your life, not your biography, right? You know, when I taught at HUC, I taught homiletics for 13 years, which, is a fancy word for how to write sermons, weddings, and wedding addresses and eulogies. And the first thing I would write on the board for the eulogy section was, an obituary is the facts. A eulogy is the truths. Mm. If I say to you, hey, I was born on June 3rd in 1960 in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and I went to Aquila Elementary School, you don't know anything about me except my age. But if I tell you I grew up in Minnesota with the Minnehaha Creek running through my backyard, and when the stress and tension in my home became too much, even as a little boy, I would get in our canoe and go out on the creek and find solace, and I still find solace in the quietude of nature. Now you know something about me.
Right. What we really want in the legacy of a human is their truth, which is not the facts, but it's their soul. So I'm not leaving you out, David. Dr. Rubin, you've been with many people as they're nearing death, and you've held their hands, as have I, as has Rabbi Leder. What have you learned about their need to communicate their soul and not just their stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because I come from a much more secular profession than the rabbi, and at the time that we close with our patients, there isn't that much communication. There are things that they will tell the rabbi that they won't tell their doctor, and that's okay. It's different lenses, it's different parts of their brain, so to speak, and parts of their soul. And that's okay. I can't tell you how many times we brought in rabbis and priests and other religious professionals who come in for a different aspect of the final chapter than we can provide.
It's so like nourishing to hear that, because we can provide something that you can't provide, but you can provide something that we certainly can't provide. Rabbi Leder, writing an ethical will is a process. And you really gave us a handbook, a practical handbook of how to write it with, as you mentioned, 12 organized questions. But acknowledging you're going to write one is actually confronting death. So what do you say to the person that's like, I'll write that later. I'll read the book later.
Yeah. Well, this is the other part of the book and why I think it has taken off the way it has. I think once you get into it a little bit, you start to realize this book is not about your death, it's about your life. And millennials, we just got the first analytics in from sales. Millennials, kids in their 20s and 30s are buying this book like crazy.
I can believe that.
Why? Because it's not that they're consumed with their own death, but they're trying to figure out, what is a meaningful life? How do I really want to live? I'm starting out on a path. Is this the path I want to be on? And what and who, of course, it's never a what, it's a who matters. And if you go through this book, if you let me hold your hand and we go through this book together and we ask and answer these questions together, you will have not only an ethical will for your loved ones when you're gone, but you will have a kind of MRI of your inner life that you can hold up to the light and then say to yourself, okay, this is what I say my truth is. This is what I say I believe in. Am I living that way? This is what I say my truth is. Am I living my truth? Or is my life mostly kabuki? Is it mostly pretend? And that's a very important exercise in essentialism about life, not about death.
Well, it's so interesting that you say that, because the ethical will, as you say, must be revisited again and again, right? You change your regular legal will as your life circumstances change. And of course, you need to change your ethical will. So the idea that millennials would start writing it and every 10 years revise it, or 5 years. Doctor, I keep wanting to say Rabbi Rubin, because I know Rabbi Rubin, but
hey, my mother would prefer if it was Dr. Leder, so I think it's a fair trade.
Well, so would my parents. They would have preferred Dr. Hirsch, or Dr. Swilling, actually, is what my maiden name is. So, Dr. Rubin, one of the things that I know is that you read the book and had a lot of strong feelings about it, and it touched your soul. So, what do you think was the most poignant question, or the one that got you in, as we say, in the kishkis?
Kishkis, okay. First of all, I like the book a lot. The rabbi is a very good writer, but he's even a better listener. And I like that a lot. The book is a mirror. The book is a mirror to the reader. And there are some things for everybody. There's something for everybody in that book. There's some things that just kind of pierced my heart, and others that weren't for me.
Give me an example of something that pierced your heart.
Well, the chapter that really pierced my heart is what is a good person, because I spend a lot of time dwelling on that. I was actually just communicating with a colleague on the East Coast, and I did a favor for her. I found a doctor for her mother, and she said, "You're a mensch," and I said, "There's only two things I ever wanted out of life. One is to be a mensch, and the other is to be a good doctor." So, yeah.
And I love that the book opened that up for you. Mm-hmm. So, Stephen, I keep going between Rabbi Leder and Stephen because we're colleagues and friends, and also I have deep respect for you, so please know.
You can skip the rabbi part. It doesn't matter to me. It's fine.
You were so vulnerable in the book. You said things that most rabbis would never say, let alone anyone. What was the thing that surprised you that you were willing to be so revealing about? We'll get to how people responded to it in a second, but what was that one moment that you thought, I can't put this in a book, and then suddenly you were divulging it?
I'll tell you what it was, and it wasn't a concern for myself as much as my wife, which was in the chapter, What is Love? Basically, the structure of the book, for people that haven't read it, is that I pose these questions, each of them, by the way, in a very deliberate order. And I talk about why the question is important. I answer it for myself. And then I've curated the answers of a very diverse and interesting group of people who I know their names, but it's all in the book anonymously. And then a concluding little piece at the end of each chapter. And one of the questions is, what is love? Because it's one of those like Potter Stewart things. For those of you who know Justice Potter Stewart was, when he was asked to define obscenity for the Supreme Court, he said, I can't define it, but I know when I see it. So love is one of those things that we say, well, you can't put love into words. You can't describe it. Well, yes, you can, if you work at it, if you dig. And in the book, I reveal the most intimate thing I've ever done with my wife was to empty her drains after her double mastectomy. That's love. That's intimacy. Love is this, let me put it this way. The first law of biology is self-preservation. But the first law of the spirit, the first law of love, is the transcendence of the self and the embrace of another. That the other is us. We are one. That, to me, by the way, as a religious person too, I would say that's when I feel closest to God, is when I sense this oneness, when I transcend my own biological imperative for something higher.
So Dr. Rubin, would you say, because I know what I would say, but would you say that for doctors, that sense of service is a moment of transcendence? Or would you call it something different or not at all?
I can't speak for all doctors, first of all. I view it for myself, and I have thought about this much more as a calling. And it's kind of what I was meant to do. And so I don't know as a transcendence per se. It's a match. They have an interesting saying. They've done several studies on geriatricians, which is what I am. I care for only older people. And geriatricians are actually the happiest of all physicians. They've done several, and it's not because we get paid a lot. It's not because we do procedures that restore people's vision or get them to walk again. And our patients are very complicated. They have complicated medical illnesses. They have complicated cognitive problems such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And they have complex social situation. And the messier it is, the more we like it. And that's a calling.
I think there are a lot of rabbis that were meant to be doctors and doctors that were asked to be rabbis. And there's such a crossover between.
Well, I think, Sherry, what it is that we both are kind of called to run toward the fire every time.
I think that's very much so. So let's pivot for a second, Stephen. You mentioned that a lot of people contributed to this book. And at the end, you say this is all anonymous, but you know who they are. So first of all, what was the one thing that surprised you most in one of the answers? Was there one answer that was like, oh my God?
Well, there are two things that surprised me. The first is that I felt like I was asking each one of these 30 or so people to do me an enormous favor. Because this book really requires us, as David said, to look in the mirror and to reflect deeply upon our lives. And, that's a time-consuming and difficult thing to do if you're going to take it seriously. And I felt I was asking them to do me an enormous favor. But every one of them, when they finished and sent it to me, sent it with profound thanks, a profound sense of gratitude. They were thanking me for encouraging them to think this deeply about their story and their life. So that was a surprise. The other surprise, I mean, there were so many, but I would say that it's related to the first question. And the first question is first for a very deliberate set of reasons, which is, what do you regret? And what what I discovered as the common denominator was that most people regret most, not something they did, but something they didn't do. The words they didn't say, the time they didn't show up, the path they could have taken but didn't due to fear. One of the more common answers in what do you regret, and obviously there are variables in the stories, but was basically people regretted not reaching out for help sooner. And I think that, you know, Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud, the prisoner cannot free himself. That's a very powerful verse in Talmud. The prisoner cannot free himself. We have to reach out. And I'm sure David will tell us that elderly people with community, with a sense of community and who have a village, they do better. They do better.
I was going to turn to you, David, and say, what's the science behind that? Because I know we hear that all the time about reaching out and seniors and nearing death. Tell us that.
Well, there's a lot of science behind connectivity, as opposed to isolation and loneliness. And I've always thought integrating this stuff together is that you want to have lots of lifelines, particularly because things are going to go bad. Things are going to go bad somewhere with your health or your relationship, or your spouse is going to die. I mean, there are things that are going to be bad as we get older. It happens to all of us. But these lifelines, these connections, and these connections sometimes are to people, sometimes they're to passions, things that they really like to do. I'm continually impressed by my wife, who has kind of been reborn after a distinguished academic career. And her passion right now is dancing. And what we used to say about, we've had a series of dogs. When dogs get really excited, their ears go back. And so I say to my wife, your ears are back.
That's great. That's
love that. I love that.
So great. And here's I think another important point behind this regret chapter. I often say to people when they come to me to talk about regrets, just to kind of snap them out of it quickly, it's kind of a triage approach. I just look at them and say, Sherre, I have given up all hope of a better past. It's an immediate message that regret in the past is not about the past. At its best, it is about the present and the future, that we are not shackled by yesterday's ways. If you regret the things you didn't say and the things you didn't do, you cannot change the past, but you can change the future. And I'll give you a small example from my own life. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I was ever a cold or withholding person. And, I'm pretty, friendly person.
Affable.
Yeah, I'm affable. Yeah, I can work a room, right? And I've been in the congregation for 35 years. During COVID and after, I found myself saying I love you so much more often and so effortlessly. And I mean it. I mean it. I was ending Zooms with staff and with people and my family and everyone, and I was ending, and I still end with, I love you. I really love you. I started signing my Yortzeit letters, Love Steve, and I mean it. I just didn't fully express it before. And I regret that I didn't fully express it before. And it took something disruptive like COVID to encourage me to soften that outer shell a little bit more. And this is a beautiful use of a past regret to have a better present and future.
I love that. There's a lot of sprinkling of Jewish wisdom throughout. I mean, you are a rabbi, but it's not a book for Jews. It's a book for everyone. And I think there are some listeners that are on thinking, oh, this is all great. I'll go through the questions. There's a lot of people that it requires an act of courage to sit down and look at these questions. I said, what was your biggest failure? And when I read that chapter myself, I thought, ugh, that could be like a book in itself, right? So what do you say tactically to the person that's like, I don't know if I want my children and my legacy to be about my failures and my regrets. I want them to only remember the good, the love, the joys, the celebrations. How do you respond to that?
That our successes teach us nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing, except to keep doing the same thing again and again and again. It's one of the commonalities in the what's your greatest failure chapter is that virtually every time that person's greatest success was originally planted in the soil and rooted in the soil of that failure. In fact, one person who answered, who happens to be the mayor of a major American city, went so far as to say, I don't think I've ever failed because every failure has taught me something that has ennobled my life going forward. So if you want to ennoble your loved ones' lives going forward, don't present yourself as a person without flaw and failure. You know, I do this when I do these, what clergy call intake meetings with families. These questions are the questions I've been asking for 35 years when I gather a family together to get to the truth of their loved one's life, to prepare them for the funeral and prepare myself to write a eulogy. And this has happened to you probably 100 times. We're having this conversation, we're making this stew a story, and everybody's laughing, and it's so beautiful. And at the right point, I always stop and I say, so far, she sounds perfect.
Right.
And no one's perfect. So what wasn't so perfect? And you can see the eyes dart around the room, and the faces look at me and they look at each other as if to say, how does he know? Does the rabbi know? Can we talk about this? And then it opens up, and it's real, and it's healing, and it's instructive. And if you want your loved ones to trust that you are being authentic, then be authentic. Tell the truth.
But it takes a lot of courage also to reveal some of those secrets and sadness and remorse that you've carried on for years. So for the person that's struggling right now, saying, you know, Dr. Rubin, Rabbi Leder, this sounds great, but like, I have real shame in my life. What do you say to them? Do they write the ethical will for certain people and the ethical will for other people? Or do you say to them something else?
First thing I would say is shame is an indication that you're a good human being. Let's start with that. And write it for yourself for now. Listen, I was vulnerable in the book, but I pulled some punches. You don't know everything about me from my books. There's some truths that I'm not going to share. That's true for all of us. We're all one way or another out of alignment with our professed ideals. Our lived ideals and our professed ideals are never completely perfectly aligned. Now, when the delta is enormous, that's a very unhappy, bitter, dysfunctional person. But there's always some divergence between our professed values and our lived values. I would say write it for yourself. Keep it. Sanitize it a little if you feel that it'll be too much for your loved ones to take when you're gone. But at least look in the mirror, as David would say. Really look in the mirror, because that is the only way to have a better, more beautiful, more meaningful life going forward. There is no other way.
Well, I want to pivot for 1 second. We're getting a lot of questions, and I encourage the audience to jump in with all their questions on the Q&A, and I'll turn to them in a moment. But one of my favorite chapters was, what will your epitaph say? And in a world of Twitter and in a world of 160 characters, and having buried my own parents and having my own health challenges, I thought about this a lot. And so again, what do you say to people that are like, I think that's not good for the evil eye? I mean, if I'm writing to my children, by the way, add this to the stone, right? What do you say to them? And how much should we think about it?
I say, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. And why is that germane to your question? When you have to distill the truth of a person's life down to 15 characters per line and 4 lines total, you are engaged in a very, very powerful and instructive kind of essentialism. It strips away a lot of nonsense. And I'm always struck by the fact when I walk through the cemeteries, which I do a lot, I'm always struck by the fact that despite each of us being a unique human being and leading a unique life, almost everyone's epitaph is exactly the same. What do they all say? I mean, with 98% consistency. Loving wife, mother, grandmother, sister, friend. Loving husband, father, grandfather, brother, friend. That's it. When you have to distill the purpose of your life down to its most, crystalline essence, it is about that tiny handful of people, and no one has more than a tiny handful, who really matter. Now, if that's what you say you want your legacy to be when it's carved in stone, then you get to ask yourself this very important question, which we've been circling around. Am I living that way? Am I living that way? Am I in alignment with what I say I want the last 60 characters of my life to be? So it again is not about our death.
No, it's about your life. And that's what I think is so powerful about the book. And I would turn to you, David. You shared with me beforehand, Sherre, I really want to say something about the book. Did it make you question some of the choices in your life or want to revisit them?
No. I think my take on the book, and it's been said several times, is it's almost a little bit like a bait and switch, because it says, for you, whether after I'm gone, but it's really not so much about legacy. It's more about a wake-up call for the life that remains. And that's actually, I think, one of the great beauties of the book.
Well, and that's why I think during the pandemic, it was a worldwide wake-up call for people. That's why we saw the Great Resignation. We saw people leave their marriages. We saw people get married, because we need a definite interrupter to say to us, are you living the life that matters? And I think, Stephen, this book is really about, are you living the way that you matter to yourself and to others and ultimately to God? So I want to turn now to some questions. I do have to say, Stephen, you have a lot of friends and family out there that are just loving on you. So I'll leave those aside. Okay. And also your parents. I guess Len and Barbara were really Menschlichkeit people, and I have no doubt, because I think it runs in the family. But tell us the first, and they're in no particular order, but why didn't you ask the question, what do you have remorse about? Why regret?
I think regret is just a more common word that people can relate to more easily than remorse. Remorse is a little bit more highbrow conceptually, and I think regret is just a more common currency. But I could just have easily have said remorse. I think it's I never know if it's a distinction without a difference or a difference without a distinction. I don't know, but it's one of those two.
Great. So second question, and I'm going to turn to you first, David. Like Rabbi Leder has been by the bedside of over 1,000 funerals. Can't say 1,000, but I'm coming up on it. You deal with fractured families, and a lot is projected onto you as the physician. And how do you deal with a fractured family, both in giving them the support they need, but also in giving them the guidance and love to manage through it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that you raise. There are a lot of relationships and families that are hanging on by a thread, and that sometimes is a lot easier when people are healthy. And when health deteriorates, a lot of it really unravels. On the other hand, I've actually seen transitions of using this last chapter, the poor health of the parent or the spouse, as a time when people reconnect. And it is an experience. The last chapter is a chapter. It's not just the end of the book. And so the opportunity for those who know that life is short to be able to say, what can we do now that we wish we could have done earlier?
Beautiful. Tell us about the soul, Stephen. We have a lot of questions about defining it. Is this going to shape your soul? Is this going to heal your soul? What is the soul?
Well, again, let me start, via negationis, by what it is not, because I think that's helpful. So I've stood in front of well over 1,000 dead bodies, and it is so clear to me, and any of us, I think, who have done this, that there is so much more to us than our corporeal being, than our physical, than our bodies. Our bodies are not who we are. That wasn't my dad. And so I think one way I understand soul is that it is everything about us that isn't our body. Everything. I.B. Singer said every person is a cemetery. I think that's such a beautiful idea. And what he meant was that we all carry within us the generations that came before us. Now, it's literally true in terms of our DNA, which I think is also soul, right? I mean, there is a part of us, if we're lucky enough to have children, that literally they carry some of our DNA. In fact, quite a bit of it. But we also carry them in other ways. And all of those ways and aspects that the dead dwell within us, I sometimes quote Tagore. I say they peer through the pupils of our eyes. I sometimes say when I know someone is brokenhearted at a wedding because their spouse or partner of 50 years isn't there to see that grandchild be married, I'll take them aside and I'll say, you see it for her. Let her peer through your eyes. And we can do that. I can summon my father. I can summon him. And this is the beautiful part of memory. There's a duality to memory. But only human beings have this ability to summon someone from the past and bring them into the present and carry them with us into the future. That is a miraculous thing. Miraculous. Now, it's also true that memory really hurts sometimes. But when we summon them, we are summoning their soul. And people will say, well, that's just a projection. I don't care. It's my projection. That's like saying dreams aren't real. Yes, they are. Of course they are. So to me, it's now, again, it's impossible for any of us to know. This is, of course, the difficult thing about all discussions of afterlife in all religions is there's only one way to find out what it's really about, and no one can come back to tell us. But I think it is all of the non-corporeal things that make us who we are. And I think that part of a meaningful life, therefore, is living as a good ancestor. We don't think of ourselves as ancestors, but we all are ancestors, just not yet.
Just not yet.
Right. We're all going to be carried in the cemetery of someone's heart and soul. And are we living that way?
So I want to get through, the questions are coming in fast and furious now, and I do want to get through some of them. A woman writes, or a sir writes, that as a person that avoids looking in the mirror at all and doesn't really like looking in mirrors, how do I get over the fear?
I'd say start with your shoes. Let me explain. Many years ago, I was working on a book about love. It was a collection of essays about love, things people love. And there was an essay in it about shoes. I went to the head shoe salesman at Neiman Marcus and I said, what is it with shoes? And I interviewed a bunch of women about why they love shoes. And I know some men do too, but generally speaking, women percentage wise. Really
I
love
love shoes.
Yeah,
I love shoes.
right. And one of the reasons is that no matter what is going on in your body elsewhere, when you look in that little mirror off the ground at your feet in those shoes, you look great. So I would say, if you don't want to examine your life, start with the parts you're proud of. Start with the shoes. Start with the feet, right? You know, you don't like the way you look in a bathing suit? Start with the shoes. And we all have that. You know,
I love that. Start with the shoes should be a slogan. It should be trending. Someone wrote beautifully that their spouse died at 49 years old. And they shared 23 very powerful, beautiful moments together. How much of that intimacy and that really private stuff should be shared in the ethical will?
We're all the only experts in our own lives. We're the only expert on our own lives, and even we don't know all that much about ourselves. It's really up to this person. This is such a personal decision about how much to reveal. Just as a writer, I would say, put it all on the page and then work backwards. You know, there's an old joke in journalism, the reporter hands in the story to the other and says, sorry, I didn't have time to make it shorter. Because it's hard to edit. I would just put it all down there. This is what I do when I write. I put it out even if I'm not sure. And then I start removing little chips and pieces, even sometimes the ones I love. So I would say put it out there if it were me, but it's not me. We're only experts in our own.
Well, and I love that, because I always say for every 85,000 words that makes it to the book in my own life, there were 200,000 words that didn't.
Right.
So I appreciate that. Dr. Rubin, what is a common conversation that you have with end-of-life patients?
It's interesting. I try to not talk about the end of life. And it's because that's, you know, obviously if a patient brings it up, I'm very willing to talk about it. But I really try to talk about what's important to them now, how they're feeling, what can I do to help them? And, you know, it's not like a confessional.
Well, it's interesting because the follow-up question to that was, is there privilege at doctor-patient confessionals, and is it different from rabbi-patient confessionals?
You know, I am certain that there are things that people have told me that they have told nobody else, and that they'll go with me to my grave. But I don't think that many people or most people feel that these confessionals belong with their doctor. They belong with with Rabbi Leder or yourself, or Leder yourself, and you know, it's a different avenue.
So lots of questions about Bob Dylan in the background in both of your offices. A lot of questions about, is this a coincidence, or is this something that shaped the two of you's career? So I don't know who to ask first. I'll let you guys duke it out.
Doctor?
Yeah, well, mine was up there first. I think the good rabbi is
I'm copying your style.
Copying my style, but his is signed, right?
Right. So I'm a Jew from Minnesota, and if you're a Jew from Minnesota, I could just honestly tell, I'm going to see Dylan tonight at the Pantages. Why? First of all, what he demonstrated. I come from a place where most people never leave. Most of the kids I grew up with are living 5 miles from the home they grew up in. They're running their father or father-in-law's business. They married their high school girlfriend. Nothing changes. And when I was a kid, what Dylan represented to me as a teenager was, you can make it out of here. You can go to New York, and you can do it with words. That was a revolutionary idea to me, that you could get out of small town Minnesota with words that a curly-haired, geeky Jewish kid could be Bob Dylan. Not that I could be Bob Dylan, but that Bob Dylan could become Bob Dylan.
Right. That it's like a little Jewish kid could become Bob Dylan, a legacy and a legend.
With words, with words.
With words, right? With just his mind and with his words.
Yes. And so for me, I've always admired that so much and been so moved by he deserved the Nobel Prize for Literature. He deserved it because he reinvented songwriting in America. He reinvented lyrics. And that's why I admire him so much.
Well, I think his legacy, and he hasn't died yet, but his legacy is very much, his music is his ethical wills.
And
right?
He's still at it. He's 81 years old.
And he's still writing it. He's writing these ethical wills over and over again. And I'm sure if we had him in the room, I can't guarantee it, but if we said to him, how would you want to be remembered? I think that's question, don't quote me, 9 or 10. How do you want to be remembered? He would say, by my words, by my music.
Or he wouldn't answer at all.
He wouldn't answer at all. I don't know him. I can't speak for him.
He wouldn't answer.
He wouldn't answer.
So at the end of the book, and before we close, Stephen, I wanted to give you an opportunity because you did something quite brave. You dedicated the book to your 2 children. And then at the end of the book, you wrote your ethical will and published it to Aaron and Hannah. So what I'd like you to do, rather than read the whole thing, because you'll have to get the book if you want to hear the whole thing, I'm going to have you start towards the end, where it says, I used to love to dance. And I just want you to take a moment, if you're watching, close your eyes. I promise I won't kill the camera and nothing. Just close your eyes and listen to the ethical will of the person who's here to teach us how to do them.
So this is a letter, and it begins, Dear Aaron and Hannah. I used to love to dance, but when I became a more public person, I stopped dancing at weddings and parties. I allowed my fear of what others might think of me, fear of being a spectacle, to keep me from dancing. I regret that now. It was a bad example to you, and it robbed me of joy. Don't let fear of what others might think keep you from dancing or singing or loving. Let nothing and no one suppress what your soul longs for. Live so that you do not die with a longing soul. Count your blessings. When you are feeling less than or want more or are mired in self-pity, which happens to us all, look around and count your blessings again and again and again until you tally 100 of them. Everything is easier when you are grateful. Feel for others. People behave badly because they are damaged. Let your first impulse be one of empathy. That being said, there will be a handful of people in your life who demand too much, who are mean, narcissistic, negative, causing you to feel terrible about yourself. Cut these people out of your life. You cannot fix them. Be good, and the rest works out. See the world with the people you love. Cherish time. It matters so much more than things. Mine, with you and Mommy, has made my life worth living. I wish for you that kind of love now. I wish for you that kind of love when I am gone. Say the mourner's prayer and light a candle for me when I am gone. Feel its warmth and know I love you still. Dad.
David, Stephen, you are a blessing. And I know that everyone here can count just one more today because of the words that you've put on the page. I want to thank you both for your time. I hope that everyone listening takes a moment to get For When I Am Gone, Rabbi Leder's 5th book, but even more though, that you will take the instructions inside and write your own ethical will and leave your legacy, because we never know when it is the last time that we will read a bedtime story or hear our parents' final words. We're taking a much needed summer break, and we look forward to welcoming you all back on September 14th, 5 p.m. for Andy Dunn's Burn Rate, Launching a Startup and Losing My Mind. Please be well, stay well, count your blessings, as Rabbi Leder said. And good night.
Thank you, Sherre. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Best.